Good morning, people. Let's continue the conversation, shall we? Now, it's often been said, and it's a bit of a trope, that sailboats are powered by wind and the wind is free, and this is baloney. The wind itself might be free, but the mechanism by which you capture it and get utility of it is expensive. And the fact is that while a minimalist lifestyle on a sailboat can be very cost effective, it does require compromises, and it requires a steady income, and it requires planning, and in fact, in a large degree, it requires a business plan in order to keep everything tight and above board. If this is not understood, it's not infrequent that individuals will get into boating and they will not understand that it's likely at some point, especially on an older boat, that a significant repair will need to be done. It will be likely that that repair will need to be done with cash out of pocket rather than being financed. It'll probably happen at times that are not convenient. And unless you're in a position where you have thought far enough ahead and you have a business plan and you're in a situation where you can in fact, through cash in pocket, self-insure yourself against these things, you're going to have trouble. This is why, again, as in the previous video, I recommend having a 3-year plan wherein one builds up experiences, skills, a home habitat and stomping grounds, and in fact a nest egg, so that when the inevitable happens, when you tear a mainsail or some other thing craps or somebody steals your dinghy, it isn't a game changer. Your project isn't over. It's a serious inconvenience, of course, and a cost, but because you know that these kinds of things are inevitable, you are in a position to recover from them, and it isn't going to be something that ends your voyaging. Now, there's another aspect of this whole planning business that seems to set a lot of people off, but again, it's fatal to ignore this reality, and that's this, that it's useless to have a plan for the future if you don't have an operant model of what the future is likely to look at. I mean, we could all understand that it would be really dumb to pack a swimsuit and I don't know, lots of shorts and suntan lotion if you're going to undertake sailing in northern BC in January. Okay, it might be a grand plan. It might make a lot of sense in an abstract sense, but considering that you are going to go sailing in January, all that planning is pointless because it does not take into account the circumstances that you're going to encounter, right? Most people I know are allergic to having a model of what the future looks like, mostly because of fear, all right? And rightly so. The next decade in particular will have a great deal, even unprecedented, insecurity and difficulty. Coming off a period of incredibly unprecedented stability and wealth. We're not well prepared for this. But the reality still remains that if you are thinking that you can create a plan for the next 3, 5, 8 years based on a model of a world that has gone away, you are certainly going to fail. And of course, building a model for the future is a rabbit hole that can take some time to go down. And there are plenty of people out there who are prognosticators who have different versions of what that future looks like. But it has become pretty mainstream now that this term that I've used for years around here, this bottleneck moment, is, well, That's the kind of language that you hear on the tip of most of the gurus' tongues now. It's nothing outside anymore. But without too much detail, it's going to be hotter, more crowded, poorer, more expensive, and the opportunity for getting ahead in life is going to be more scarce, right? Demographics is a major component of this, especially in the boating community, as it has a tendency to be older in general. I mean, I see that for sure. Um, we don't have to think about the future so much. I can tell you what's happening right now in my environment. I see um, in the islands here some of the critical infrastructure that's been around for the last 30 years starting to disappear, mostly because the retirees that have taken over most of the waterfront property in my area are getting too old to visit anymore. The cost of living in these areas is still too expensive for anybody to move into these areas. The fuel price that it takes to get over the ferries and such to get to these areas to try to live there makes it prohibitive for gainful people to move into these areas to replace what has basically been turned into vacation homes, right? What was once a working waterfront and viable economy in these islands is largely gone because it could not compete with the real estate costs and development costs. So it's gone. So there's really no functional economy um, on much of the coast now, with a couple of exceptions. Um, Critical infrastructure such as grocery stores, fuel docks, and the rest are becoming harder to find by, and a fair number of them closed. There is a pressure to remove, in fact, marinas in my area because they are not um, profitable. There's a mandate in Canada that any leaseholder that holds these properties has to have a business plan for 3 to 5 years that shows some kind of financial viability. There are few enough boaters now where, and I mean boaters rather than people living on boats, boaters, that there are few enough boaters now that the marinas have become largely trailer parks for indigents, and that's just not profitable because they have a tendency to not pay their bills and get behind and disappear and abandon boats where now the marina must pay the cost of disposal. It's very easy for that to be a business plan that does not work for marinas. It's becoming just easier for the marina to turn into something else, like support for float homes or something else, where the tenants that you have are more reliable. And that all really sucks, in fact, as far as I'm concerned, because I've seen a culture of boating really, really diminish over the years. It was much, much more vibrant once. And I mean, there's still us long timers floating about, but we are the far minority, right? We are the far minority. But it is what it is, and I don't have an axe to grind, and I don't have an agenda here. In fact, I don't have very many agendas at all. I mean, being the student of the I Ching and systems dynamics that I tend to be, I if you have circumstances, you have consequences. And if you don't like the consequences, you need to change the circumstances. This seems to be something that's lost on a lot of people. But anyway, that's how it is going to be. So what does that mean for the cruising sailor in my area? Well, um, the culture changes a bit. The, the fact is that where there is a tradition up here of what we call gunk holing, which is a kind of a port-to-port travel of small anchorages here and there, as there's a zillion of these scattered up the coast. And there used to be far more in terms of small independent communities that could support, you know, refilling of fuel and or groceries and or water and or the rest of it. Well, there's just less of that. And of course, this is additionally compounded by the fact that any of the anchorages or harbors that are viable and easily accessible have attracted large numbers of harbor squatters, really, on derelict boats, more or less hanging on, rowing in and out, taking advantage of the facilities as best they are able, while contributing very little to their upkeep. That's a pain for you too if you're hoping to visit these areas, because there's a lot of just congestion and debris in the anchorage and lack of space. But again, the shoreside businesses get very frustrated with catering to people who are not particularly good neighbors and don't really contribute much to the systemic whole. In times they just say it isn't worth it and they give up. Unfortunately, there aren't enough like cruising sailors and boaters to provide. Well, there aren't enough of us cruising sailors to justify having to deal with the rest of the crowd. So, I can understand why they would make those choices. It just means for those of us who want to maintain this lifestyle, again, we're going to have to be a lot more resilient. But where services still exist and where they are still viable, they tend to be proper marinas that have costs involved with their stay, which are higher than they used to be in the rest. What it really means is that anybody that's going to do economical cruising in my area is going to need to be a lot more self-sufficient and for longer periods of time than they would have in the past. They're going to have to carry more of their own groceries, more of their own fuel, more of their own water, just simply be more resilient and have the ability to stay without services for longer periods of time. That probably influences to some degree the kinds of boats that an individual might choose to consider for sailing in my area, which is going to lean towards larger boats and heavier displacement, simply for the reason that you can carry more stores without performance penalty. And I have definitely gone that way myself. I'm not really an advocate for bigger boats, although I have something 45 feet now. But a lot of that comes down to not preference necessarily, but just the fact that I need to have the staying power and the water capacity and the fuel capacity and the ability to carry stores and tools, reasonably comfortably for longer periods of time than I would have in the past, where I enjoyed lighter displacement, faster, sportier boats, where you could go from harbor to harbor and you could stay on a dock here or there, and there was access to, I don't know, community showers here and there and all the rest of it. Just so much of that is gone or costly that one needs to be tremendously more independent. Not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the nature of where we are headed in the future. And in my area, at least, looking at that trend, it has made sense for me to invest in a larger, more capable vessel than would have been my inclination otherwise. And having been doing this for a couple of years now on this boat, I feel good about the choice, but of course there's a cost and effort and learning curve involved in all of that. You too will have to consider and create a model for what the future looks like in your stomping grounds for your shakedown period, and create a strategy that will work, operating on the model and the understanding of what it's going to look like for the next 3 to 5 years. Your model better be correct, because otherwise it's easy to optimize for circumstances that just simply don't exist for you. So none of this should be any kind of surprise. In the plan that I suggest for you, it works like this. You spend part of your time in your home port, preferably in your slip with your tools and your employment, saving up the economic means to self-insure and buy yourself some freedom. Obviously, you want the maximum earning rates that you can find for yourself while still retaining the ability to take large tracts of time off, because there's no point in being involved in these lifestyles if you work all stinking year round, because you won't gain the necessary experience or skills. Whatever you can do more or less at more or less part-time labor with the best wage that you can find for yourself in those circumstances is what you want to gravitate towards. And of course the opposite is true too, that when you are away from the dock, you want to be as fastidious as you possibly can to have your burn rate of your resources as low as possible. So as much as possible, you want your fuel consumption and your food consumption and your need to spend time ashore spending money and your questing for porcelain bunnies or whatever else it is that you feel compelled to do. Any of the things that cost you money are going to dip into your freedom. So while you want to earn as much when you're in the port, you want to spend as little as you possibly can when you're underway. It'll take a skill set to be able to achieve both. And depending on your area, that may look different. For me, it involves working as a boat builder and shipwright for 6 months of the year and basically living a modest lifestyle as a cruising sailor who augments a lot of their protein with fishing and such while underway, and it ends up being a pretty cost-effective sort of thing. When I'm out, I might need to encounter and spend time in a marina proper for 24 or 48 hours once every 3 to 4 weeks to refill tanks and laundry and, I don't know, gab a little bit with strangers and, you know, that kind of thing. But largely speaking, I'm spending time as much as possible in a functional wilderness enjoying what I'm out there to see. Your mileage may vary. Your recipe may look really different. Whatever it is, it's got a balance on a balance sheet. And if you've got that sorted out for yourself and you know what your recipe is and you've got a sensible model of how to do this and you've had practice and learning to do it, like, it's a business plan. It's a career. You'll be able to maintain that without any trouble or mishap for years, and that's where you need to get. Now I'm going to be taking off for the weekend here with my dad, and I'm heading over to the islands because I have some work over there, actually, doing some electrical install. But I want to kind of prime the pump for the next discussion here. This is something that's not immediately obvious. A lot of people will fall down in this plan that I'm suggesting here. Okay, it's easy for people to understand the model of earning money in the port and having some gainful employment for part of the year and all that. It's just that there's another skill set here that isn't immediately apparent to you if you've not lived the lifestyle, and that is, what the hell are you going to do with your time when you're out and underway? And it can be a real adjustment for people to go from pumping it really hard in a job environment to what feels like a lot less when you're out in the anchorage. And there's an expectation that you're just sitting around reading a book or listening to music or whatever. Well, not that there's anything wrong with doing that, but really, I think it's important to understand that if you're going to take this on as a business, you need to have the skill set to be gainful in both environments. Not only in the urban working environment, but also in your sailing environment. Right? Now, of course, I'm getting into that a little bit with the fishing. But whatever you can figure out to do to give yourself some kind of gainful employment while underway, even if it's really minimal, something that burns up some idle time and keeps you occupied, that's really valuable. Now, of course, again, just because of where I am, a lot of that's fishing, because the fishing is in fact lucrative here. Uh, and I certainly do a certain amount of boat repair here and there as I find it underway, because I can't help but encounter that. But there are things that a person can do in the quiet time of sitting in a remote anchorage that can contribute, of course, to future opportunities if you're clever. One needs to be able to learn to be gainful in both environments and not think of the sailing as a vacation so much, but as a, well, just another aspect of your lifestyle, which is just as much a part of your business and just as much part of your career as it is pounding out going to work in the city. In the next episode, when I get a chance to do this, I will try to put together a series of tips on that score, because that's not something that's commonly discussed, and it's super helpful. But anyway, that's my intent. So, I'm going to button it up with that. I hope some of this is useful. You're going to have to figure it out for your own purposes, of course, but hopefully, if you're new to the biz, this will give you some idea of how to start thinking about it so that you can create for yourself a strategy and get moving straight away. Cheers.